Hey guys, welcome back to my channel, and I have with me here my little toucan. I just call him Bird basically, but the first name that I gave him is Chatterbox, and he is not a fan of the camera, so I'll see how much I can film with him here. And he also has some issues with aggression going on right now, which I will talk about in this video. So basically I wanted to comment on some of the things that was said in the 2CanTV video about Beatrix's aggression and toucan aggression in general. Calm down. There were some people commenting on my other video that she had missing tail feathers that apparently worsened since the last time she was seen in videos and whatnot. And so I just wanted to quickly talk about what could potentially contribute to some issues with toucans being aggressive and having various behavioral issues and things like that that people consider to be behavioral issues. So let me just first start by saying that toucans, the default way that you're supposed to care for them is that you are meant to have a very large enclosure. Actually, years ago, when I really wanted a toucan, I just thought I could never have one because most of the sources on toucans, of which there weren't that many, basically stated that you're supposed to have a walk-in aviary to house them, not just for the large ones, but even the smaller ones, including the green aerosaurs, like this one. I wanted one of the green aerosaurs, but I thought that you needed a cage large enough to do jumping jacks in to have one, so I assumed I could never have one, and maybe I would have enough space to house a emerald toucanet in one of the larger parrot type enclosures. Later I saw people were keeping not just toucanets but even aerosaurs in more feasible housing, because I certainly can't have any outdoor enclosures. I've never lived in an area that allows outdoor enclosures anyway, and there's nowhere inside the house to construct a very large walk-in aviary. But when I saw people housing them in more reasonable enclosures, then I started to realize, well, maybe it's doable. And it's not ideal, so to speak, to keep them in enclosures like that, but it can work out, especially if they are hand raised and of course you're not breeding or anything like that. And in such a case, it's doable, even though it is not the ideal housing for them. So in a case on 2CanTV, it should be noted that keel-billed toucan is not being kept in a flight aviary, and because that bird, is a rescue and you don't really know what you're getting with animals, of which you don't know what their history is and you don't know what their disposition is, it would probably be safer to have a very large enclosure for them as a default. But if something works out differently eventually, then that's great too. But you do need to have some kind of backup for the larger toucans, because ideally for larger toucans like keel-bills and tocos, flight aviaries are ideal. I understand some people keep toucans in larger parrot cages, and that's fine as long as it works out for them, for those individuals. But some of them probably will need the more standard flight aviaries. And this brings me to the next point that I really need to make here: housing more than one animal together. Now, some people might say, oh, these birds live together in the wild and they live in flocks, so they're very social and they don't mind being around other birds. Well, that might be true for birds in the wild, but animals in captivity are in obviously nothing like the setting that they're in the wild. And it's not, I have absolutely no problem with keeping animals in cages, obviously. I'm always speaking out against people who act like keeping animals in captivity is imprisoning them or something like that. But the fact of the matter is, when you have more than one animal in the same enclosure, the fact that the enclosure is obviously not even close to the amount of space they would have in the wild suddenly becomes very, very apparent, because animals do need to have their own space, and they do need to be able to get away from each other if there's some type of aggression thing going on. And it's just natural, you know, even when humans are friends, it's not like you want to be trapped in the same room with your friend all the time. It truly is amazing that some animals do actually get along when they're enclosed, because that is just something that you would not expect from them. I mean, case in point, you know, if you watch the channel Animal Wonders, you will see that even though her cages are very nice looking from a pet owner's perspective, they're actually not that big. I mean, they're perfectly fine, but when you're talking about putting two animals together in them, then it's a totally different dynamic. For instance, she had an issue with, I think, her Patagonian Mara and Porcupine. Those are two different species, of course, and she tried to house them together, and there were some issues where one of the animals was ultimately injured. And then she had two foxes that she housed together, which actually got along really well, which was, again, that's pretty amazing. But as one of the Arctic foxes got older, she had to replace that Arctic fox with another one, and she actually kept 3 foxes while the older one was still alive, together in the same enclosure, which again, by pet owner standards, they're nice cages, but you know, relative to keeping multiple animals together in the same enclosure, it was not ideal. Ultimately, she had to rehome the new Arctic fox that she got, and it didn't get along with the red fox, and there was some injury that occurred. The red fox actually had a relatively severe injury to its tail. And you know, that's not surprising. And actually, somebody told me that red foxes and Arctic foxes are natural enemies in the wild. So the original Arctic fox that got along really well with the red fox was actually raised from a young age. So you'll see that happen a lot. Animals, when they grow up together at a younger age, it often thwarts the natural dynamic from the expected behavior, and you'll get different behavior. But when it didn't grow up with that animal, then the situation is completely different. And then there's my experiences. I've only had 2 different species of animals, of which I had more than one in the same enclosures, and they both turned out problematic. The first was with my Chicoan Maras, and unfortunately I had some very bad problems with one of them pulling the other's fur out. Even though for the most part they were friendly towards each other, they're a very social species and they really should be kept together whenever possible, but I ultimately had to separate them. And then there's my African pygmy dormice, which actually live in a very large enclosure. And you would think with all of that space that there wouldn't be any issues, but those tiny little mice fight all the time. I hear them constantly going at it, and actually one of them even dropped their tail, presumably from some form of stress, and it's just annoying, but I would still rather have them together. Nothing has been severe enough for me to separate them as of yet, but they do fight, even though they do sleep together in the same nest and everything. So animals fight, and there's going to be issues, and they don't have the same amount of space that they have in the wild. So in the case of Beatrix, I don't follow the 2CanTV channel regularly. The videos are very long, so please jump in if I'm getting any of this wrong. But the last time I checked, he was keeping Beatrix in a cage, a large macaw cage that was divided, and there was another bird on the other side. And I'm going to post a picture here. I don't know if the situation is the same, but if this is the situation, then the increased aggression does not really surprise me. Of course, it could be something else. I'm just completely speculating, but this is just something that should be taken into consideration. Not all birds are social. They are different in captivity. just forget about what they do in the wild. It's almost completely irrelevant. I mean, it's like a starting point, and we don't know how much genetics accounts for their behavior, but environment plays a massive role. And then there's just the fact that these birds have a lot of weird triggers. This one, for instance, he's completely obsessed with his nest box, and it seems to increase his aggression. He's actually 7 years old, and he will be 8 in August. And he has been extremely friendly to me until recent. He's been having aggression issues, which is why I'm kind of holding him this way, because he will randomly attack and just kind of clamp down, and it does hurt even though it doesn't draw blood. So yeah, you can see he's pretty excited right now. He's starting to get a little fidgety. But yeah, they have weird triggers, and actually on a Toucan forum online, somebody actually told me that their toucanet had issues with aggression until they removed the nest box, and eventually the issues subsided. I'm not going to remove his nest box. I have it latched in there with tie wraps and everything, but that just shows the complexity of what makes them act in weird ways. They just have all kinds of strange little triggers. So, you know, I don't know if Beatrix is wild, so to speak. I mean, these birds, it's just kind of normal for them. As I said before, I mean, I kind of accept them the way that they are, and that might be why some people might conclude that they don't make good pets, even though it just really depends on what you expect from them. You know, some of them, again, they just need a lot more space, especially there's a good chance that Beatrix is just parent raised. I had a cockatiel who was parent raised a long time ago, and that bird was not friendly, and you know, because it's a cockatiel and they don't ship anything from Australia anymore, I know that she was not caught in the wild. So that's probably the situation with Beatrix. And it's just normal. When you take on a bird, a rescue bird, then you should just have the proper enclosure that they could potentially need. Otherwise, it's probably not a good idea to take on a rescue of a species like a toucan. The other thing is that sometimes exotic pets just don't like it when their environment changes, even when their environment was inadequate, such as apparently was the case. You know, oftentimes they bond with their owners and then they don't show affection to any other humans afterwards. That happens a lot with parrots, and it could potentially happen with toucans. So one thing that I do agree with is the fact that she probably won't change. This is just the way it is with some animals. I just put up a video about my sand cat, and as I explained, she never stops hissing, she never stops growling at me, and it's just the way that she is. Even when it seems like she might be getting a little more tolerant of interacting with me, she still hisses and growls and just acts like the type of pet that you probably don't want to have. So I just tried to be honest in that video and just let people know what they could potentially be in for when they look into getting a sand cat as a pet. There are other sand cats that are just great. All these animals are not the same. So basically, caring for toucans, I don't think it's rocket science. Just as the original care guide stated, you know, you probably want to keep them in a very large aviary, although certain individuals can adapt to more. So this bird, the breeder actually told me to keep him in an even smaller cage as the standard size. So I had a little more room, and I actually upgraded him to a larger flight aviary for small birds like finches, and it's been working out pretty well. And I actually can't believe that he survived this whole video without freaking out. I was pretty sure I'd have to put him in halfway through. That's just the way that toucans can be, and some aren't. Some are better than others, but don't get one unless you are prepared to deal with the worst. So expect the worst, but appreciate it when you get the best. And the fact that they can change. Like, again, he's almost 8 years old, and he was highly affectionate, and now he's very bitey, and yes, he will attack me in the face in certain situations. It's not what some people would consider ideal, so if that doesn't bode well with you, you probably don't want to get one. So for toucans that are wild like that, they would just do really well in a larger aviary where they can be enjoyed. A lot of people don't mind keeping birds just to look at them. Not all of them can be, you know, the companion types. Contrary to popular belief, pets can be animals that you just care for and you look at. They don't have to be your companions. And I feel like that's why some people kind of get this attitude, oh, it's not a pet because it's not like a fluffy little Pomeranian following you around. There's a lot of animals like that. Not all animals have to be that way. Not all horses have to be ridden, etc. I mean, if I had the space, I would have a bird like that, just that I can look at. I would really like a Victoria Crown pigeon, and I don't think that they are interactive kind of animals. You just have to learn to deal with the way that they are and, you know, appreciate what you can do with them. And for some animals, that's just looking at them and enjoying watching their behaviors. Anyway, that's it. Thanks for watching.